Hello, and welcome to another episode of About Faith. After considering the role of the think tank, I spoke to Douglas Murray, the director of the Centre for Social Cohesion, a London-based think tank that sets out to study issues related to community cohesion in the UK. It is the first think tank in the UK to specialise in studying radicalisation and extremism within Britain.
I set up myself for four years ago now. The main impetus was the 2005 London subway bus bombings, and there wasn't at the time any organisation in this country that focused on radicalisation in the UK. So we focused on that, have done for the last 4 years, and we've published on a whole range of areas, always on the trying to sort of break ground that hasn't been looked at before. For instance, I mean, one of our first reports was on honour crime, so-called honour crime in the UK, which is the sort of thing that a lot of people would tell you things like. They say, I've heard X, Y, Z, and of course there were cases that have come to court, but nobody had sort of joined the dots on it. So that was something we did. And actually since then there's been a huge government stepping up there, involved in the area. Done a lot of stuff on radicalisation, on free speech issues, on terrorism issues, always with the aim to improve the public discourse and public knowledge on these areas, but also hoping that the politicians take notice. And sadly, in our political climate in this country, it was certainly the case under the Labour government, and I think it will probably remain the case under this one. Really the only people that the government listened to are the press. It's a terrible tragedy of our democratic politics, but the Brown government in particular, but Blair was as bad, were very, very reactive. You know, whatever was on the front of that day's newspapers, you know, it was sort of sets the agenda. In which case, the best way in which you can try to influence what politicians are doing is to make sure you get it in front of them on their morning breakfast table. And so that's what we've done. We've had huge media interest in our work. We always get significant coverage, front pages, leaders, and so on. And it's partly because of the work, but it's also because these are issues that the public are very, very concerned about.
This is becoming a recurrent theme, how the press is leading debate. Some argue that the so-called gutter press is executing this, or that right-wing newspapers are covering stories not always in a holistic manner. I asked Mr. Murray what he thought of the current press role, and whether there should be more of a push to address the issue within the Commons.
Yes, I mean, to go back to this, I think the press, it's very interesting. Immigration professionals always criticise the press in some way for its coverage of these areas. The fact is that the press is doing its job of simply reporting, commenting on, investigating things that are of major concern to the public. It's a rather surreal situation we have in this country, actually. I mean, it's the same in other European countries as well, to an extent, but I think it's particularly strange here that the issues of greatest concern to the public are the issues that are least addressed by politicians. If there's one thing I'd point on, this is that there is just now a vast democratic deficit in this country, which I think is very, very problematic, and which I wish the politicians realised, which is that when you go around this country, in my experience and also polling data back stuff, issue number one is immigration. Now, I mean, in recent months, in the last couple of years, since the financial crisis, it has, to an extent, been knocked down to issue number two, and sometimes even three. But you also find that people are aware, and polling data suggests this as well, as far as I can see, that they are aware that these issues are also intertwined, that unemployment issues have to do with immigration as well sometimes, and that these, you know, in the same way, I mean, people say this about Europe now, that often now when people talk about Europe, it's often suddenly these issues also come into that. So, I mean, with that caveat, I would say that it is and has been for a long time issue number one, and most concerned to the British people.
This is not the sense I've got from other people I've spoken to. In fact, many have argued just the opposite, that it is not of great concern, but is blown out of proportion by the press and reactionary groups like the BNP and the English Defence League.
I don't, if I can say it isn't of concern to the political class, but it doesn't appear to be of great concern to the political class, who see it at most as a sort of managerial matter, which I don't think is how the public see it. So the press actually, I think, does a very important job in that, in between, by providing an outlet for the concerns that people have. The House of Commons doesn't debate a lot of the most important things anymore. And I think this is a very important issue, that effectively there is almost a sense, I think, in Westminster, there are now very significant decisions which the British Parliament does not have a say in, which its government cannot affect. And you could be absolutely hopping mad about it. There's nothing you can do. And those people who've been predicting these sort of things for some time, it always sounded sort of apocalyptic. Actually, it's very mundane when it happens. It's just, well, I feel physically sick about this idea, but what can you do? I'm only the Prime Minister. And I think immigration is one of those issues. The kind of, what can I do? I'm only the Prime Minister. What can I do? I'm only an MP. What can we do? We're only the House of Commons. Which has a serious knock-on effect for morale in the country about our ability to deal with anything.
In previous episodes, I've talked about the heterogeneity of London. I asked Mr. Murray about the differing interpretations of race throughout the UK and in comparison to the USA. He has a fairly negative take on integration throughout the UK.
Yeah, London and the rest of the country do very different things, I think. And I mean, some of the other major cities obviously have similarities, but I mean, by and large, because the world wants to come to London. The world does not want to come to, Stoke, but may well end up there. I mean, it's a very strange thing in that it again points to one of the way in which politicians see this issue, because, as you rightly say, I mean, in London it feels very sort of, I mean, I remember once in a debate with Ken Livingstone, the former mayor, I remember he once was boasted, terribly happy that he said something like 60% of Londoners weren't born in the UK or something. And it sounded great, and he sort of thought, well, yeah, but what's your ideal figure on that? What, 100%? I mean, what's the... but somehow in London it doesn't... I mean, it's for lots of reasons, obviously, employment issues, job opportunities, and all that sort of thing. It's only when you go outside London and see, I think, the migration, the impact of migration, that you see the greatest problems. I mean, former mill towns in the north of England where complete Pakistani villages have been transported to, which have no jobs. I mean, importing communities to an area that no longer has any employment. I mean, I was speaking about this recently with some people at a left-wing magazine, and they were saying, even we, nobody on our side on this debate thinks that was a good idea. That was a catastrophe. Never do that again. So yes, I mean, the difference between London and the rest of the country is, I think, very striking, and it's one of the things that politicians have to be aware of, precisely in order that they don't treat the rest of the country in the same way. I mean, obviously there are significant problems in London that arise from this as well as benefits, but I think they're ameliorated by the economic potential in the city. And also, I mean, obviously the way in which, I mean, as you know, in America, it has tended to happen differently. I mean, Moynihan's melting pot. One of the most interesting steps in that, and Moynihan says, somewhere near the beginning, the thing about the melting pot is it didn't happen. He points to that thing of, even what is it, the 1960s, the Italian population in New York, still in the Italian area, and so on. We're in a very strange position in this country, though, because, to an extent, everyone makes this up as they go along, but we've been making it up more as we go along than most people. I mean, I think in America, there's one of the things I would point to, one of the general things is that the thing of the hyphenated American is obviously has issues, but I would think by and large is sort of a way to deal with the identity question. Now in this country, we didn't have the hyphenated bit, the hyphens weren't around, so people became British. And it's only now that people realise they didn't in a lot of cases, and they aren't going to, that now we have the sort of British Pakistani and so on. So this is raising a lot of questions about what it is we expect of people who come into the UK. And the answer has been, is not very much.
Well, isn't this reflective of a British openness to change and adaptation to population shifts?
I mean, there are various ways to do it, as you know. I mean, either you decide... The Chief Rabbi had an incident in his book, a recent book, where he talked about the different concepts of a country in which, I mean, you might decide it was a hotel, where anyone could set up their certain rules, they do whatever they want in their own room. I would have thought the different models available, broadly speaking, would be, I mean, one in which we were entirely values neutral, where anyone could come and be whatever they wanted to be. One in which we encourage that, one in which we discourage that, and one in which we encourage the opposite or discourage the opposite, i.e. becoming British. Of these, I mean, I think that most people would agree that there are certain ground rules that everyone would have to be in agreement on. And I'm myself in favour of more ground rules than most, or a lot, of people in the area. I mean, take the honour crime debate, for instance. It is now pretty widely accepted that certain practices go on in certain communities which are abhorrent and which the state should intervene in. And I think there's also an acknowledgement that there has been a period in which the state did not intervene because it didn't want to. Take forced marriage or something as well, or girls being removed from school at the age of 16 and taken off to Pakistan or something to marry, or someone in the subcontinent. I mean, a very, very large number of people knew that that sort of thing was going on and would have abhorred it if this had been white British girls being forced into marriages they didn't have a say in. But nobody wanted to tread into it. In other words, there's that kind of, well, that's the culture of these people. This is what these people do. I think I think that was always just appalling as a strategy, above anything else. Morally, pretty grotesque as well. But, you know, the police not investigating matters. And this isn't anecdotal. A few years ago, there was a whole set of 100 and something crimes that the police opened investigations into. They hadn't investigated before because they thought they were community matters. There's slowly people realise what the ground rules might have to be. And I suppose the debate now will be whether you limit it, as it were, the sort of hotel-like, or whether you try to make something more integrated. And the only reason you wouldn't do something that's more integrated is you don't have the confidence to do so. And I think that's what's happened in this country, is that we haven't told people what we expect of them because we don't have the confidence to. That's because on so many issues in this area, it says more about us than it does about anyone who comes in. It tells us more about our own societal failures and weaknesses than it does often about those of people who are arriving in the country. If you don't have confidence in your own civilization, if you don't have confidence in your own culture, if you don't have confidence in your own values, then of course you wouldn't wish to impose them on other people. And this is one of the great British tragedies of the modern age, is that we don't trust ourselves. And people knew that if they said, sorry, we don't do that here, and we don't tolerate it, that they would effectively be put on the back foot of, who are you to tell me what to do? I think that's the root of it. You can see it in the politicians trying to deal with the issue. They don't want to be accused of being colonialist, as if you could be sort of colonialist in your own country.